Hi everyone, welcome to the visual guide for Eden's Gate Resurrection Savage. This is the first new Savage difficulty encounter made available by patch 5.05 in Final Fantasy XIV Shadowbringers. My name is MTQ and I'll be your raid guide. Eden's Gravity is a raid-wide AoE blast that deals a set percentage of damage. Healers be ready with shields and heals and keep a close eye on the main tank who is also taking auto attacks during this time. The first Vice and Virtue will target all 4 damage dealers with these markers. After a short while, they'll be hit with circle AoE blasts that will leave behind these deadly puddles. To handle this, affected players can move away to avoid overlap and drop their puddles safely away from the boss. Next, Eden's Flare is a room-wide donut attack with the only safe zone inside the boss's hitbox. All players will need to move into the boss to avoid death. Next, another Vice and Virtue. This one will target both tanks and eventually slam them with a line attack that deals high damage. Tanks will need to ensure they face this attack away from the group and use appropriate cooldowns. Immediately after, the main tank will be targeted for Spear of Paradise. This is a 2-hit tank buster that applies physical vulnerability up debuffs. To handle this, one tank can take both hits with an immunity, or the off tank can provoke during the cast, and then each tank takes the hit with some cooldowns. The next Vice and Virtue will target both healers with this prey marker. This attack deals high damage and applies a very spicy dot debuff on the affected player. To handle this, these markers can and should be passed to each tank as quickly as possible. The tanks can then easily handle the damage with cooldowns while the healers focus on keeping them alive through the debuff. Next, the boss will teleport to one of the corners and begin to cast pure light towards the center of the room. All players will need to immediately move behind the boss to avoid this. As you move into the corner, be extra careful not to touch that wall or you will die. After this attack, the boss will teleport back to the middle and cast Delta Attack. This combo of AoEs is identical to the normal mode version, except on Savage there are no telegraphs. To handle this, you'll need to split the raid into groups and assign safe spots for everyone in each quadrant. As a reminder, here is what the incoming Delta Attack AoEs look like and the resultant safe zones. Each player will also have an assigned spot to spread to avoid overlapping. Once all of the AoE attacks have resolved, players can resume their attack. Next, the boss will cast Dimensional Shift, dealing massive AoE damage, changing the appearance of the platform and spawning 8 orbs around the boss. The boss will then cast Paradise Lost, spawning 5 sets of AoE circles around the 4 furthest players from the boss. To handle this, you can assign specific players to bait these AoEs away from the boss, allowing melee to keep wailing on it. This is immediately followed by Pure Beam, an attack that will cause each orb to target the closest player with a massive line attack, dealing high damage and placing magic vulnerability up debuffs on them. To handle this, all players will be assigned an orb. The 5th AoE circle to drop will coincide with the cast of Pure Beam. This is everyone's cue to move close to their orbs, standing on the outside of the orb ring so that each line attack is baited away and not overlapping on anyone. The boss will then jump to a corner and cast another Pure Light. There are no more AoE attacks targeting you anymore, so all players can easily and quickly move behind the boss to avoid this. Next, the boss will jump back to the center and cast another Dimensional Shift, dealing more damage and bringing the platform back to normal. This is immediately followed by Fragor Maximus, dealing even more AoE damage and marking the beginning of the ad phase. Similar to normal mode, 2 proximity-based damage markers will appear in the east and west. Everyone should move to the south to minimize damage and utilize their raid cooldowns. Each tank will grab an ad and move them together, taking care not to face them towards anyone else to avoid cleaving damage. Each ad will attempt to cast Mana Boost, which will boost their damage to lethal levels. These casts must be interrupted, so I would recommend assigning players and backups for each interrupt or you will die. The ads will then begin to cast Mana Burst, dealing high raid-wide damage. You'll want to focus one of these ads down first, so you're not dealing with the damage from 2 Mana Bursts at the same time for too long. If these ads are not destroyed in time, they'll begin to cast Unto Dust and you will wipe. Once both ads are down, you'll need to sit through the same comically long cutscene and try not to fall asleep. Once everyone is returned to the platform, the healers will quickly top everyone off before the encounter resumes. The boss will immediately cast Paradise Regained, giving her a buff that alters and enhances her usual abilities. Anytime you see this buff on her, make sure you handle each mechanic appropriately. The first altered attack is the tank Vice and Virtue. This will deal immensely high damage that must be shared to survive. The attack also places a magic vulnerability up debuff on all players and an extra physical vulnerability up debuff on the first person to take the hit. To handle this, each tank will need half of the raid to stack in front of them to help them soak that damage. This can be done in any orientation around the boss, as long as the two groups are not overlapping. Next is an altered damage dealer Vice and Virtue. Each damage dealer will be marked up and must stack with a partner to share the damage of the incoming blast. Each pair needs to ensure that they're not too close to each other to avoid overlap. Next up is an altered Delta attack. This is basically the inverse of the original Delta attack, and all players will need to stay within melee range of the boss to avoid the room-wide donut attack. Each tank is targeted by a lightning strike, and they'll need to spread to avoid overlapping with anyone. One non-tank player will be targeted for massive damage that must be shared with the rest of the group. Since none of these attacks have telegraphs, players will all stack behind the boss, with the two tanks spread in the front. Once all the Delta attacks go off, you'll be free to spread for the next mechanic. This altered Prey Vice and Virtue starts off by marking up the healers. This time, however, the prey target cannot be passed to the tanks, as the resultant hit will add a massive poison debuff, physical vulnerability up, and healing magic down debuffs. Instead, each healer will pass their prey target to a damage dealer. The healers will need to keep a close eye on the resultant dot damage until those debuffs fall off. This is followed by another Spear of Paradise. Use an immunity or tank swap with cooldowns as necessary. At this point, the boss will lose her Paradise Regained buff. Next, another dimensional shift. This time, 4 arcane spheres will spawn around the center of the arena that will bring down meteors onto the platform. Each sphere needs to be destroyed before the meteor hits the platform, or you will take insane damage and suffer some nasty debuffs if you survive. At the same time, 4 light orbs will spawn that each have a directional marker on them. These orbs will again bait their attack to the closest player once the boss casts Pure Beam. However, this time, each orb will throw out a 3-pronged AoE towards the player that will then turn in the direction specified by the orb's marker. This can seem very hectic the first time you see it, so let's break it all down. The goal is to create a safe zone in the center of the room so you can safely destroy each sphere and then resume your attack on the boss. You'll want to assign 4 players to handle each light orb. These players will bait their respective orbs to force the line attacks to shoot towards the outside of the arena. The orb attacks turn about 180 degrees, so make sure you bait on the side that will force the attacks to turn away from the center. If baited correctly, this allows everyone else the freedom to safely destroy each sphere from the safety of the center of the room. The boss will then jump to another corner and cast another Pure Light. Move behind to avoid this as necessary. Another jump to the middle, and another dimensional shift cast to heal through as the platform returns to normal. At this point, we'll see a repeat of some of the original mechanics. Heal through the damage of Eden's gravity. Move into the hitbox for Eden's flare. Next, both tanks will deal with their regular Vice and Virtue line tank busters. This is immediately followed by another Spear of Paradise. Don't forget your cooldowns and tank swap if necessary. Next up, another round of Vice and Virtue puddles on each damage dealer. Remember to avoid overlapping and drop these away from the boss. This is followed by another normal Delta attack. Make sure you move to your assigned safe spots to avoid the combo of AoEs. The puddles from the previous Vice and Virtue attack will still be up at this time, so watch your step. Next, another regular Prey Vice and Virtue. These Prey markers will need to be dumped onto the tanks, mitigated, and healed through. Remember that this dot damage persists for some time, so watch tank HP during this duration. Next up, one final dimensional shift cast. Heal through the damage and set yourself up to bait each light orb in the same manner as before. The rest of the group will destroy the arcane spheres as quickly as possible before returning to the boss. Move behind the boss when she jumps to the corner to avoid the next Pure Light cast. Another dimensional shift to return the platform to normal, followed by another Eden's Gravity AoE blast. Move into the hitbox once again for the next Eden's Flare. At this point, the boss will cast Paradise Regained once again, and players will need to be ready for each altered Vice and Virtue attack. The first involves stacking in front of your assigned tank to soak the damage. Second, stack with your damage dealer buddy to share the next round of damage. Eventually, the boss will cast another Hard Enrage Fragger Maximus. You'll need to destroy Eden Prime before this cast goes off, or you will die. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. Up next, we'll head down into Eden's Gate Descent. As always, thanks for watching. Till next time.